Hola amigos, bien o no, y saludos desde Medellín. Hoy voy a compartir algo con este libro, por razón porque este libro es escribiendo en una forma lengua muy académico, con mucha complejidad. En verdad es muy difícil, muy difícil. Entonces, ¿por qué leer este tipo de libro? La idea es para leer parte de esta, un parágrafo, algo. No para traducir, pero para escuchar y buscar para entender en total el sentir de las parábolas. Esta es una cosa para cuando tenemos un texto muy complicado con un nivel muy alto, cómo nosotros podemos entender el sentir de las parábolas. Esa es la idea de hoy. Hello again from England. On a splendid day here today. Today I'm going to share with you another difficult book. This one is called The Limits of Scientific Reasoning by David Faust. Now this is an academic text, no doubt about it. This is something I had to read way back in my university days, and I have to tell you, it is not easy at all. It's difficult. It's the kind of reading you can read it and think, what's that about? But why try that? Well, okay, you might find some new vocabulary, but also this is a way of practicing the idea of, rather like when we're in a complicated conversation or a conversation on a new topic that we don't know that much about, we have to kind of like listen to what's going on and try and get a sense of the general idea that's being spoken about. This is kind of the way to practice it in a written form, because by reading stuff that's beyond your normal reading, complicated expressions, difficult vocabulary, you're going to rely on the general background context of the book, like what's the book about, generally, to give you some clues as to what the person's talking about, and see how much of it you can understand without translating it. This is an interesting technique because often when we're in conversations, sometimes we don't understand every word, but we need to get a sense of what the conversation is about. And this is one way to practice it, picking a book on a subject that you know roughly what it's about, but potentially is quite a high level compared to your normal level of reading, to see if you can do it. So this book is talking about, well, the limits of scientific reasoning. So he's talking about problems that scientists encounter when they're doing their research, because they have to be very accurate, but there are potentially problems in limits to how much they can understand about a particular thing, and perhaps they have some kind of prejudice or preconceived ideas that stop them seeing things that are actually there. This is the kind of idea. So I'll just read you the first paragraph. See what you think and see what you make of it. Let's have a look. Scientists, along with all other individuals, evidence cognitive limitations that lead to frequent judgment error and that set surprisingly harsh restrictions on the capacity to manage complex information and to make decisions. In the case of the scientist, this limitation extends to the judgments required by most prescriptive programs for science. This thesis implies that many descriptions of science must be inaccurate because they assume or report activities that go beyond the bounds of the scientist's cognitive capacities. In consequence, many prescriptions for science must be revised in some manner so that the scientist can meet the judgment demands. Well, what do you think? Tricky words, yeah? Interesting phrases. How to approach this? So, okay, on the first read of that, we know they're talking about scientists and problems they have in their research. What else can we say? Well, if you look at it sentence at a time, you get a slightly different idea, a bit more detail you can add to that. And this may be a way of helping you rephrase what you've heard or what you've read. So without necessarily translating it, see if you can rephrase it in your own words. Because there are some strange phrases. Let's look at the first sentence. Scientists, along with all other individuals, evidence cognitive limitations. Well, in this sense, evidence cognitive limitations just means that you can see they have problems with taking decisions or thinking, that kind of the cognitive process, that lead to frequent judgment error, so they make mistakes, and that set surprisingly harsh restrictions, so very difficult to manage limits, on the capacity to manage complex information and to make decisions. Okay, so they're having trouble dealing with all the complexity of information they've got. In the case of the scientist, this limitation extends to the judgments required by the most prescriptive programs for science. So here he's saying that the scientist has a particular problem because the kind of judgments or thinking that he needs to do in order for his work to be seen as science is particularly challenging in this respect. And so he says, this thesis, in other words, the book that he's writing, implies that many descriptions of science must be inaccurate. So the way they're saying that particular work is science, in that sense perhaps some of it really is not in the true sense, because they assume or report activities that go beyond the bounds of the scientist's cognitive capacities. So to say that they've conducted, in this sense, scientific research in a very specific way could be doubted if we allow that they might be making mistakes because they're just not able to make a decision as complicated as the scientific process says they should be able to do. In consequence, many prescriptions for science must be revised in some manner. So you might need to change the definitions or look at the ways that science is supposedly performed, so that the scientist can meet their judgment demands. So the scientist can do his job. So there we go. You see kind of how it works. So you take the general paragraph, pick something really complex if you can, because it's going to stretch your vocabulary. Read it. Don't worry about translating it, but see if you can, in some ways, rephrase or give a short summary of the paragraph, but in your own words. If you can do that, that's a good practice to get into, because when you're in more complicated conversations, hopefully you'll get used to generally following along the general thread of the conversation, if you like, and not find it too confusing. Plus, you may well pick up some interesting vocabulary. You never know. So I hope that one's useful. Déjeme saber en los comentarios, como siempre. But for now, we'll say cheerio.